Hi, my name is Nico Heller. Welcome to Reboot 2030, the Democracy Schools YouTube channel. My guest today is Lene Rachel Andersen. Lene is an economist, a futurist, and a Bildung activist. What exactly that is, we'll come to during the dialogue. She just finished her 20th book, a book on libertism, not liberalism, libertism, which is out in June. She's the co-founder and the president of Nordic Bildung, which is a Copenhagen-based think tank, and she's a full member of the Club of Rome. Now, without much ado, let me just invite her in. I can see her already here in the waiting room. Hi, Lene. How are you? Good to see you.
Oh, I have no sound, I think. Can you hear me?
I can hear you perfectly well.
I cannot hear you, so...
You cannot hear me?
Can you try and say something?
Well, I should be there. Can you not hear me? You probably should. Huh. Did you turn on your sound?
Oh, wow. I may have to log out and come back in.
Okay, please do that.
So, see you in a second.
I'll see you in a second. Okay, let me say a few words about Lene. She set up a think tank called Nordic Bildung, and prior to that wrote a book, I believe prior to that, or alongside that, wrote a book, Keep Growing, Bildung, Keep Growing. And I think the idea behind the book was that we approach education in far too narrow a way, that to really, if you like, realize the full potential of who we are as human beings, and also to give us that extra leverage in terms of doing things that, you know, our confidence or our sense of self wouldn't otherwise allow us to pursue. We need a kind of educational model, a Bildung model, as she would say, that goes beyond the traditional sort of banking model of education. So now there she is again, and she can explain all of that much better. So let me see whether we are more successful this time. Let's see how this works. Okay. Hello. Can you hear me?
Yes, I can.
Okay, so now we're on, huh?
Good, excellent. This is so much more fun.
It is indeed. I'm glad. Well, this is the thing with technology. We're totally, you know, hopelessly helpless and utterly reliant on the technology gods of this world. Lene, thank you to be with me again today. It's been a tumultuous and a really quite amazing time over the last 6 months. I believe you've been very, very busy. And there's a new book coming out by you on libertism. I already kind of sneaked that in as a sort of as a piece of information. Maybe towards the very end of our conversation, you can say a few words about that, so that you readers know what to expect there in future. But today, it really is back to where we kind of ended the conversation last time, which is your building Rose model. And I think for viewers who haven't listened to us before, maybe as a first step, just briefly explain what you mean by Bildung and what the Bildung rose, I believe it relates to petals of this model, what this means and what it stands for and what its purpose is really. And then as a second step, what I'd like to do is sort of start to think about what its applications are, what we can do with this model. But let's start with the model itself so that people know, you know, where you're coming from. Over to you.
Good, thank you. So, yeah, Bildung, what is it? The word Bild means image, and originally in German, and originally in the Christian fundamentalist era in the 1600s, right after the Reformation. It meant in the build of Christ. And who was this build of Christ? Well, that was the individual person who should develop and become this froom person who would think, act, behave, and feel in a certain way in order to be a good Christian. So that was the image of God. Then it became a secular concept in the 1700s. And today in modern German, it basically means education. So it is something that it has to do with our inner maturation, our knowledge, and our understanding of the world. And the shortest way that I describe it now is that it is two different kinds of knowledge. The first kind of knowledge is the knowledge that is relatively easy to transfer from person to person. So that can be math and science, or it can be how to bake a bread or cook pasta or something. It doesn't have to be academical knowledge, but it's something that I can share it with you, and then we can see if you learned it and you got it, and you can reproduce it.
Is when you talk about that, so just when you talk about that aspect of Bildung, are you referring to what Dewey might have called the banking model of Bildung, which is essentially about depositing knowledge in people?
Yeah, and we can all do that, and you can do it, with all kinds of stuff. The other kind of knowledge is the one that is very hard to transfer from person to person, and you barely can do it at all. And that is that is what comes from life experience, and it's the emotional learning. So, I mean, I can tell you as much as I want about a heartbreak, but if you haven't experienced a heartbreak, it won't make any sense to you, and I cannot check if you understood it. Not until somebody broke your heart, then we can oh, that was what it was about. Literature and other kinds of art can, to some extent, allow us to feel what other people feel, and we can, through that, get experiences and be in places that we've never been before and that we will never go, but we can still experience what it's like to be there. So that is the hard to transfer kind of knowledge, and we need both of them. And the way that I describe it is also that the easily transferable kind of knowledge is where you can expand your horizon in all kinds of directions. So it's horizontal knowledge, and the other one is the vertical, because it's your emotional depth and your moral aspirations and how deeply you can connect to other people, to culture, to place, and to all kinds of stuff. And these two go together. And I mean, you can have knowledge about everything and be flat as a frisbee and not have any, deep emotional life or be able to connect with other people or have any moral aspirations at all. But you can also be sort of an American football where you have a lot of emotional depth and a lot of, moral considerations and behavior, but where you do not necessarily know very much. I mean, I think we can all come to think of some, illiterate old grandmother in a village far away from city life, and who has never left the village, but has a lot of life experience and a lot of knowledge about the people around her, and who is the wise old woman that everybody goes to whenever they have a problem. So these two things combined is Bildung. So that was the first part of my explanation. The second part is the Bildung Rose.
Can I just to kind of to sort of settle that? I was just thinking about the notion of gravity, for example, which is a concept, and we have in physics, we have ways of describing and talking about gravity in terms of in relation to mass and all the rest. So we can calculate gravity, we can do things mathematically, computationally around gravity, and we get a certain understanding of that. But I guess until you jump out of an aeroplane or off a cliff, you don't really have that experiential.
Or drop a hammer on your foot or something.
Or that, indeed, yes, exactly, absolutely. This is a bit like the experience of, when like who was it with mass, when when you go into a bathtub and the bathtub sort of like spills over. It's just there's certain so there is this kind of what you might call abstract knowledge or conceptual knowledge, which book knowledge, whatever you want to call it. And then there is this kind of domain of experiential knowledge, things that you actually have to experience, presumably through your senses, a sensual kind of knowledge. Is that a fair way of distinguishing?
Sure. And I would say that's part of Bildung, is to have both, because exactly. I mean, when you fall out the window, that is when you experience gravity. Or when you go on your bicycle and you hit a piece of rock in the road and you fly over the wheel on the thing. I mean, it's like you could actually calculate the trajectory of your flying there, but it wouldn't be the same as knowing how to land without breaking all your bones in your body. So
that's right.
So they do go together, but you also have to, and that's part of being human. So if we want to talk at some point about artificial intelligence, for instance, what will it know about? I mean, it can calculate all kinds of things, but what it means to have a body that needs to interact with the world, and what it feels like to hurt your, kick your pinky into a, table or something. It's like, yeah, that takes a physical body and embodiment of your cognition. So yes, and so Bildung comes in both of these kinds of knowledge, and it's the interaction between them. The German philosopher Fichte said that Bildung comes from Anstoß, from pushbacks. So whenever you bump into the world and something happens that you didn't expect, and where you go like, oh, that is when Bildung happens, and particularly when you go, oh, what an idiot I've been. That is when Bildung really takes place. So these moments of discovery, of surprise, of things weren't the way that I thought they were, and I really have to revise the way that I was thinking. And then maybe I even go so far as to say, why was I thinking the way that I was thinking? Who told me this? And why did I believe this thing that turned out to be completely either wrong or useless or something like that? So Bildung is this complex kind of knowledge, and what we have been focusing on, I won't even say we have been good at it, but what we have been focusing on in our school systems for the past 40 to 50 years is the horizontal kind of knowledge. And I would claim that previous generations, at least in some respects, had more of the vertical kind of knowledge, because you had practiced aesthetics through religion and a lot of singing and storytelling, biblical stories and so forth in education. And so you related to heritage through the emotional experience of hearing these stories. I had a history teacher, so that was not biblical, it was just, history, who did not have a teacher's education, but he loved history. And so he narrated, first, I'm from Denmark, so he narrated the Danish history. That was third grade. In the fourth grade, he narrated European history. And I think in the fifth grade, it was like world history. And from a modern scientific perspective, that is completely, nonsense and wrong, because history does not unfold in a, linear way. And there's all kinds of, ups and downs and pushbacks and power structures and stuff like that. But to an 8-year-old and a 9-year-old mind, that made total sense.
And it's also very reassuring, isn't it?
History.
It's also very reassuring, and this notion of kind of seamless progress.
Right, and you belong in a chain of events, and not just in a snapshot in time with different power structures and where people are struggling over who can do what, but where things have consequence. I mean, and where you are because somebody else did something before that. It's not the same as saying whatever happened was inevitable. Quite the contrary. Anything could have happened. I mean, at whatever point we're in time, it can go in all kinds of directions. But we happen to be in this particular point in time in this way because everything that went before it looked like this. And of course, so that was part of, and so thereby you can actually connect to history when you have this emotional connection and think, oh, that king was a really, he was a bad king, or oh, that was like some clever rebels, or something like that. So so that is also where Bildung becomes more than just transfer of names and dates and who crossed the Rubicon when with how many elephants or whatever it was.
So in a way, I mean, it's interesting, just as a final thought on this historical perspective. I mean, it's been said that history has been written by the winners, basically the people who kind of came out on top in the end. And in a way, our kind of historical perspectives tell us more about our historians than they tell us about actual events, don't they? Because history is contested, and depending on where you are within the structure of things, it may look very different. It's not necessarily the history of kings and queens that you have experienced. It may have been the history of peasants or the history of slavery, which is a very different history. Now, but moving on from that, so in a way, I think what we're sort of saying here is that Bildung is partially about kind of gaining a sort of historical perspective, but more importantly than this, it grounds us in the here and now, because it kind of, in a way, allows us to make these really important connections, in the here and now, between where we are, who we are, and where others are and who others are. And maybe that leads up to this model you have developed on the building rights. Maybe we can kind of elaborate a little bit on that.
Yeah, sure. And history is story is part of the Bildungsrose narrative. So okay, so I'm just gonna draw it in the air here. So I've created this model that is really a depiction of society. And the reason why I do not call it the society rose or societal rose is because in order to thrive in your society, you need to know some of all of the stuff that is in this rose. You need to understand your society in order to navigate it safely and to feel a sense of agency and influence and to actually be able to grasp and talk about what is going on. So the Bildungsrose describes society in 7 domains, and the one domain is production. All societies have production of food, shelter, energy, and what you need to survive. For that, we use technology. So all societies have technology. It can be a stone axe. It can be a 3D printer. I mean, there are all kinds of technology that we use to produce stuff that we need in order to survive and thrive. There is aesthetics. It's a part of being human that we have a deep need for beauty. So we play music, we sing, we decorate our surroundings, we decorate our bodies. That's probably the earliest part of aesthetics. And when we don't have that, and when we don't do that, we suffer. I mean, there's something missing. And then all societies have, and that's sort of the middle of the Bildungsrose, all societies have power structures. It can be people who are in power, it can be institutions, but all societies have some sort of power that regulates what people can do and not do. And eventually, I mean, in the sort of extreme case, that may be violence. So if you can't convince people to behave in a certain way, or you can't control yourself and you want them to behave in a certain way, you may apply violence if you have the power to do that. Then there is science, which is a modern process. So not all societies have science as institutionalized ways of acquiring new knowledge, but all societies have knowledge about their surroundings that match scientific facts. People wouldn't have been able to survive if they hadn't known which plants are poisonous, what kind of birds you can hunt at what time of year, where the water. I mean, when the rain comes, and then we will have to harvest or plant or something like that. So all societies have knowledge, and in the modern world, we have created institutions for it and a process for creating more knowledge and gaining more knowledge. And then all societies have narrative, and that's where we have religion, but also history in the modern sense. So that is where we're telling ourselves who we are and what is a good person. And we're all, I mean, we are all convinced that we're the good guys. And we keep telling stories that confirm that we are the good guys. Even all the bad guys do that. I doubt that there is any psychopath, dictator, violent creep out there that does not tell him or herself that I'm actually the good person. It's the other people who are wrong.
Well, it's interesting, that whole thing, because I was just thinking that, a bit further, that idea. And so when you link it back to learning, the moment, for as long as you think about yourself as the person who is not just good, but also right, then you basically, you lose the capacity to learn, don't you? Because there's nothing, if you have arrived, you're complete. So in a way, kind of a learning model always requires that we kind of begin to accept that maybe we have got things wrong, maybe we have made mistakes.
Could be that I don't know everything. I know it's a hard realization to have, but I think, I mean, children are born like sponges to taking in input and trying to find patterns in it. And as soon as they have found some patterns and they begin to realize that they are in the world, there is something inside me that is me, they also want to be good persons, and they really want the praise from their parents for doing the right thing. Given that they're 3 years old and don't understand very much, they're attempts at doing the right thing very often fails, and as adults we then think they're naughty or doing it in order to annoy us, but really they're doing their best and fail like we do, but they
Sometimes.
do it at a different level. Plus, as the adult, you have the responsibility for them while they do it, so it's different. But they really want to be good, and they want to show that they're good. And they want to grasp the world and understand it, and they really do their best. And they also want to, from around the age of 5, have friends and be good friends, and be able to, and that's really crucial, be able to construct along with other children peer groups where they can play and trust each other and be friends. So there are a lot of social skills, and this is really also part of the Bildung, that you have this emotional development, and that is why I describe this vertical part. But with regard to narrative, children also want to know where they belong. And for a while, the biggest entity that they can identify with is mom and dad, or the family that they're born into. And then it becomes the peer group. And then eventually it becomes the local community. And then it's like, and then it's a country. And there's like, so are we the Danes or are we the Germans? Is our family the same as the other family? They really try to figure out what are the patterns and who belongs where, who can I trust where, who am I? And then, of course, we struggle with that throughout life. But it takes different forms in childhood and in adulthood. But the stories about who we are and the narratives about who is a good person, these are the stories that we keep telling ourselves. And we do it with movies, we do it with literature in the public sphere, but we also do it with our own, inner voice, telling ourselves that the reason why I ate this cake that I had told myself that I shouldn't eat was because I really deserved it. I mean, I have been working so hard, so I deserved that cake, and I was a better person for eating the cake. Or whatever it is that you do that you really didn't want to do, but we're masters at, self-deception and creating these stories about why we did what we did. And so narrative is a crucial part of society. And of course, at the societal level, it is the, very often religion, but it can be other myths, and its history about where our country or local community came from, who established this city, for instance, things like that. And then we have ethics as the 7th domain in the Bildung Rose. And the way that I distinguish between ethics and morals in the Bildung Rose is that moral values are telling us how to behave in familiar situations, and it's the moral values that are embedded in our stories. So that is where we keep telling ourselves that what we did was the right thing and the good thing, and what I want to do is, of course, the better thing. And then ethics are the principles behind the moral values, and they give us guidelines, or can give us guidelines, when we are in situations we've never faced before. So now that we're developing artificial intelligence, for instance, where we are about to create, and our people are creating it, autonomous killer drones, also called slaughter bots, we need our ethics to guide the legislation, the development of these weapons, and of course, international collaboration to put a ban on them, because that would be the ethical thing to do. So, so we need the production, the technology, the aesthetics, the power, science, or at least scientific knowledge, and narrative about who we are to keep us together also as a society. That's how we create trust in society. And then ethics to have sort of principles behind all of it that we can consult whenever we're too confused about what on earth is going on. And so I claim that all societies have all these 7 domains. And in order for society to thrive, they need to be in balance. And we need to pursue all of them. We need to practice all of them in order for society to thrive and be able to develop peacefully. And in order for us to do that, we need, as individuals, to understand some of all of it. And we need to have a language for it. And we need to educate each other. And we also need to be individually curious about, what goes on in the arts? Can I learn more about history when we see, for instance, a war in Ukraine? what was it about Russia that I did not know? What was it about Ukraine that I did not know? In order to be able to follow the news, I need to read up on that, because suddenly my sphere of not necessarily influence, but definitely influence on my life requires that in order for me to relate to that and not just be completely confused, I need to go looking for new information and a new knowledge about history and also power structures. So that is the Bildung Rose, and I developed the model over several years. It has had a couple of names in the process, and some of the domains, particularly the one about aesthetics. When I first created the model, I called it entertainment, but I realized that it was more. It had much deeper implications than just entertainment, but it has both the entertainment, the arts, and the avant-garde art in the aesthetics. So beauty. And I can't prove. I mean, it's almost like a game. I mean, I constructed the model and I claim that it's a lens through which you can look at any society and see if it is in balance. But how do you measure if you have all of it, and how do you measure if it is actually balanced? I have not figured that out, and so in that respect, it's not a scientific. You could call it a visual narrative.
And I mean, sort of at a comparative level, have you looked at various countries, and could you sort of say that certain parts of the world have realized more of this model, implicitly realized more of this model than other parts of the world? For example, if you look at, say, if you just take two like extremes, like sort of say indigenous populations versus post-industrial populations. If you take communist populations versus sort of like hyper-capitalist populations, if you take different kind of sort of opposites or kind of sides of the spectrum, where do you think this model realizes itself best or is best placed?
I mean, what I would really love to do is to take, for instance, a GDP for a country and say, okay, so if we take the different professions and sectors and companies and institutions in the society and place them in the different domains. I mean, theaters would obviously go somewhere in aesthetics and narrative. The tech industry would be somewhere between production and technology, but it would also be in science. And so it would take a lot of decision making to say, this kind of production or this kind of productive activity belongs here to this extent. And then you could see how much money is invested in it and how much output does it create. And then you could, for instance, I mean, there's all kinds of surveys of human resources, what's it called, cultural capital. There's happiest countries, there are the World Values Survey, there are Good for the World Index, and there is the I mean, there are all kinds of measuring which countries are functioning well. So you could see if there is a correlation between the countries that score high, I mean, happiest peoples are also one of them, and the countries where these domains are in balance. If you look at the West, the past 30 to 40 years, we have massively invested in production and technology and consider aesthetics sort of a nice to have. Politics, power institutions are important, but we're not investing in developing new institutions as we're creating new technologies. So we're struggling with containing global tech companies and their algorithms within legal structures that are national. We need global structures for that because the algorithms are global. So we have not invested in new political institutions and power institutions that match the investments in technology, for instance. So there's an imbalance. And then there's science for the sake of science, which is also in this tech and production heavy economy, sort of a nice to have and we have changed our universities from being a national pride in science and new knowledge to becoming these institutions of production value for industry, and the humanities are just starved. And I know in Denmark that there are some of the classical languages, Greek and Persian and stuff like that, where I think they're shutting down the departments, which is a catastrophe, because we've had some of the world's best researchers in these classical civilizations and languages, and we need that for the narrative. We need that to understand where we're coming from, how things evolved, where things happened first, and why things look the way that they do. And meanwhile, we have a meaning crisis, a mental health crisis, and of course we do, because we have starved all the meaning-making parts of society and just, try to get everybody to produce more and use more technology, and that is not how humans work. So the Bildung Rose can be used as a prism to see that, and I think that through history, when we look at which clans, which towns and cities, which empires and so forth survived, and where were people ready to defend even their ruler, their oppressor, when the enemy was hammering down the city gates. I would claim that is where the Bildung Rose was in balance, and where people had strong institutions, they had strong religious rituals, they had beauty, they had, of course, production enough that everybody was not starving, and there was a sense of cohesion within society. And when there's not that is when society falls apart, and you lie open to invaders, and nobody's willing to defend anybody but themselves, and that's when things collapse. So that is my claim, and I would love to have resources to actually document or falsify that you can say something like that. I mean, if it turns out that I'm completely wrong, that would be a nice realization as well.
So I mean, because the word Bildung and its close associations with education, and also, of course, within that context, schooling and the formal forms of education, right up to university level. Listening to you, I get the impression that in your way of thinking about Bildung, it's only partially a matter for the formal educational establishment or systems. It is a much broader kind of proposition, if I understand you correctly.
Sure.
As far as I understand, you would embed that. Would you have if you had a ministry of Bildung? Yeah. It's a bit like having sort of a climate change ministry, isn't it? It cuts across so many different aspects. It's not just about the economy. It's not just about consumption. It's also about who we are, and so on and so forth, and our aspirations, and all the rest. So in a way, Bildung is a bit like that. If you had a ministry of Bildung, could you just kind of tell me where it would sit, and what its remit would be?
Oh, that's a really good question. I would love that. Or the EU Commissioner for Bildung. That would be the
right.
I think that should be my aim in life, then my goal in life. That should be the EU Commissioner for Bildung.
If you'd have to write yourself a job description for that job, Lene, what would it encompass?
So I mean, it would be about I would definitely, first of all, see if you could actually make that economic, turn it into an analytical tool for the economy, and see where does the money go and where does the money come from. But I would also implement it in school systems, and not me telling people how to do, but invite the teachers and the headmasters and the unions and so forth, the people who actually know how to teach and handle both, children or education for adults, and say, what would it look like if you got to design a curriculum that balanced these 7 domains throughout all the kindergarten first through 12th grade and then into further education, if you got 6 months to develop that, and we tried that for 2 or 3 years, we would then, I'm not so fond of measurement, but for the learning if a system works or not, I would definitely be willing to measure the how well kids and students thrive before such a system, and then of course after such a system, and how fast things would change. And I would make sure to gather best practices, and I would do something that is rarely done, which is I would test it out on, I don't know, 50 schools before I would roll it out across either the continent or a country. We had a school reform in Denmark in 2011 or 14, I keep forgetting when it was, and it was just like all schools at simultaneously were to change everything, and nobody knew if it would work. The teachers said it won't work, and of course it didn't work. So now we struggle with that. So I would definitely find some schools that were willing to do the experiment and then learn from it, and have the people who are going to work with it develop it. I wouldn't be the one to do that, but I would love to be the ping pong and the co-creating the framework. I would also make sure that other ministries and commissionaries would define which of these domains are we working in and how are we working in them, and are there domains that we do not pay attention to. And even if you have a Ministry of Finance, I would say you need to know your story about what it is you're doing. Why is what you're doing the morally right thing and the ethical thing? And if you can't answer that, go back and figure it out.
I can, in my thinking, I can at the moment, just to kind of give you a hint where my thinking goes with this, I can instantly pinpoint 2 departments that my Ministry of Bildung would have. One would be a department of learning, and the other one would be a department of dynamics, or maybe systems dynamics. So these would be 2 fundamental, and in these departments they would reach into not just the educational system, but they would reach into companies, they would reach into very much into the public sector, into local government, also into other government ministries, into central government. They would even reach into the military, they would reach into the police. So that would be, can you think of in those kind of structural terms? Because what you've described just now is very much about learning, isn't it? And about the dynamics of learning, how learning in your way of thinking takes place, and how that form of learning differs from the kind of the traditional sort of like school of learning or teaching.
And it is giving people a framework within to define what it is they're doing and why they're doing it. Because if we just measure companies on profit and revenue, if we just measure a country on GDP, we're just going to get what we measure. And that is what we're getting right now, and people are suffering. If we set this up as the goal for society, and we did find some key indicators that would allow us to measure if we're going in the right direction. I would be very careful about measuring too much, because once you measure too much, you also limit people's freedom to come up with new ways of doing things. There might also be a limit to how often you measure things, because in the meantime, people are free to make mistakes and not be measured. So you really have to be careful about that. And I think one of the big disasters for our civilization was when somebody invented the spreadsheet, because it allows people with a mediocre mind to enter very large numbers into little squares, click enter, and think that they know stuff, which is a very dangerous thing. So I absolutely love spreadsheets for a number of things, but we give them way too much power. And I'd be very careful, but I would invite people in different sectors, actually in all 7 sectors. And when we speak about education, education should cover all of them, and education should be in all of them. So there is not one of the domains that is education. There's also not one of the domains that is the environment. The environment is in all 7 of them, or you can understand the environment and sustainability through all different the 7 different lenses or domains. And
It was
what
interesting.
is
It was interesting what you
environment
said.
is different. Yeah.
It was interesting what you said about being allowed to make mistakes. And I'm just thinking about a 3rd department for our ministry. So we
mistakes
have
department.
would you call
department
it
of mistakes, and there would be the office of smaller mistakes and the office for huge mistakes.
And they would have to make so many mistakes a year, wouldn't they? They would have targets.
Yes, they would have to meet some requirements. We need at least 150 mistakes from your office, otherwise it's out.
That would be so brilliant, wouldn't it? Because I mean, I see this all the time. Is people are really worried about getting things wrong, about making, because we're taught that this counts against us. This is going to hold us back. Yet it's only through mistakes that we learn, isn't it? So
you can learn without making mistakes, but you definitely can learn a lot from mistakes. And I really think that one of our fundamental freedoms is the freedom to make mistakes. And a culture that does not accept mistakes will also not have freedom, but also not innovation. And you will have people who think along the lines of, but we did not break any rules, or but we did not make any mistakes, or but we did not do anything wrong, which means that you're constantly navigating according to what we did not do. And the narrowest definition of what the right kind of action would be. And what you want as a person, as an institution, as a citizen, as a colleague, as a leader, or as an employee, you want to be surrounded by people who take responsibility because they understand what they're doing, and because they want to do the right thing, and because they are considerate about what they do, about other people, and about the consequences of what they do. And then from time to time, you actually do want people to break the rules and say, this is a stupid rule. We're going to break the rule, and then we're going to report it up through the system and say, we did it differently. Come tell me that that was the wrong thing to do. And when you have that kind of confidence, and you have an organization that allows that, that is when you can actually have an agile institution that people talk so much about in leadership training and so forth. And that is when you can distribute responsibility to people, and so you don't have to control everything from the top. And it takes a very, and that takes Bildung. I mean, it takes the emotional maturity on behalf of yourself for daring to question the rules and make your own interpretation and stand up for it, even when you made a mistake, and say, damn it, I misunderstood that, I made a mistake. But it also takes Bildung in the leadership to say, okay, I understand why you did that. It was a really, really bad decision. And, this whole part of the factory burned down. We don't want that to happen again. And luckily, the insurance company covers for it because it was an honest mistake. But please ask somebody from engineering before you do something similar next time. I mean, you want people to be able to narrate why they do what they do, and to take responsibility for their individual actions. And when you have that, that is when you can start showing trust, and when you can have an organization and collaboration where you're free to share fresh ideas and try out things and ask people for help or guidance, and where people are willing to also risk sharing their knowledge, and also have a culture where people don't see knowledge as a limited resource, but something that grows the more that we share it. So yeah, and so that would also be a Bildung thing, and that would be the vertical kind of thing. And you can only build that through a lot of iterations of letting people make their own mistakes and have their own successes, and learning from that and build upon it.
So apart from having written a book about these ideas, you've also created a global network, the Global Bildung Network, I believe it's called. And you've had a recent festival, and I believe this is becoming a bit of an institution. I think you probably want to make this an annual or biannual event. Can you tell me a little bit about what, how these people came together and what kind of motivates the network and how you see this moving forward?
So it started out as the European Bildung Network and the European Bildung Day on Europe Day in 2019. And we do that, so we have a physical gathering somewhere in Europe. 2 years with COVID, we did it online, of course, but 2 weeks ago, we did it in Copenhagen on May 9th. And next year, we plan to do it in Kiev. So better stop that war. And we have the European Bildung Network, and that has been there for 3.5 years now. And that grew to 400 people online with a tool that didn't allow them to interact. Now we found a tool that allows them to interact, and there are 100 people in the European Bildung Network. And the Global Bildung Network has, I think, 200 members right now online. And we created the Global Bildung Festival online. And it'll probably be more logical to call it the Global Bildung Day, because what we're going to do is to do it twice per year on equinox, when the day has the same length around the globe. We go on Zoom with speakers from around the globe and do a tour, a cultural journey around the globe. And in September last year, that was the first time we did it. And the concept was a bit different because we needed to figure out what we were doing. In March, we actually started in New Zealand with 2 presentations about Maori culture. Then we went to China and heard about Peking opera and Tai Chi. And then we went to Asia and had a presentation from India, one from Afghanistan. We went to the Middle East and had a presentation about environmentalism based on religious heritage, so the Bible. It was a rabbi, and then he was in a dialogue with Phoebe from Solar Punk. So we brought the future perspective together with the Orthodox Jewish, I don't know if he's Orthodox actually, but the biblical Jewish perspective on sacred nature, and became a really interesting dialogue. Then we went to Africa and had a presentation from Cameroon about Ubuntu and initiation rituals. Then we went to Morocco and heard about a community initiative called Tamkeen. We went to South Africa and heard about African rhythms that have entered popular music around the globe. And from the tip of South Africa, Cape Town, we went straight to the northern part of Norway, to the Sami Museum, where there is on display a 400-year-old traditional drum from a Sami priest. And Norway was part of Denmark 40 years ago. And so the Danish king did not want these, witch doctors to do their drum magic. So he took away the drum and imprisoned the priest. The priest died, he was 92 years old, but the drum was kept in Copenhagen. And because of the court case, it's one of the most well-described drums. And it has been on display in the Sami Museum in northern Norway since 1972. But about 6 months ago, or 4 months ago, it was officially transferred from the Danish ownership to Norwegian ownership, which was a huge thing for the Sami people. And so we had somebody, actually the director of the museum, tell us about the drum and show us, pictures of the drum. And so that was really interesting. And then we had somebody from Denmark talking about spring rituals in Northern Europe. And then we had a bit of Ukrainian history. And then we went to Latin America and heard about the new constitution in Chile, where they're going to include indigenous languages and protect them through the new constitution. We went to Colombia and heard about something called uterus culture, where they do regenerative agriculture and maintenance of ecosystems through a female perspective on being. And then we went to North America, heard about the Chautauqua movement, which was an Enlightenment and Bildung movement in the US 150 years ago. We heard about female speakers through history, and then we heard about Bildung and the blues from a jazz sax player. A blues, of course, my mistake, not jazz, blues sax player. So that was our trip around the globe on Equinox, and we're going to do that again in September, and hopefully twice a year for as long as Zoom exists. And we hope to expand it. We hope to have more people participating, and I think now we found the sort of the narrative and the format that really makes sense, and which is also, I wouldn't say it's simple to organize, but it's a lot simpler to just have 24 hours where you have a series of presentations rather than having parallel workshops and all kinds of stuff going on simultaneously. This is one, journey, and we'll
totally.
Yeah, and we also have a lot of breakout sessions where people get to meet. So we actually have people from around the globe who get to meet other people from around the globe and talk about what they just heard.
Brilliant. I think this is going to be the future, isn't it? Is that it's blending of online and offline, and to have a sort of a unifying kind of digital narrative, but then to break off from that into very concrete, like face-to-face settings. Brilliant. So, I mean, what I'm sort of thinking is this. Obviously, this is sort of, you've given birth to this kind of, for the lack of a better word, to this kind of movement, and in a way, like any good mother, you kind of have to at some point kind of let go of it a little bit, don't you, and sort of move on. But for me, the question is twofold. One is to do with how we're moving forward with sort of your involvement with Reboot, because I think this is an unfinished story, and I think I would like to follow this through with you to see how over the next couple of years or whatever this story of Bildung develops, and how this is hopefully going to have. But to do that, it would be really helpful to have some anchors, so that some sort of landmarks, so that we can say, well, in a way, over the next 6 or 12 months, we are trying to achieve X or Y or Z, and then we can sort of see the kind of a conversation around that and see how easy or difficult it was, the kind of resistance you encountered, the learning, the experiences you had, the insights you gained, and in that way, I think it would chronicle, this kind of journey in a really quite interesting way. So the question is if we are to kind of look, 6 to 12 months, this idea like a Ministry of Bildung or kind of a Directorate of Bildung, isn't that something really that could become an interesting? I mean, you're saying Europe, European Commission. I think this is really because there's a lot of best practice kind of like methodology that could be developed around that. And I wonder whether this is a kind of a totally unrealistic ambition, or whether you think that this would be something to actually formulate as a, well, yeah, why not? Let's try over the next 10 years. And we're not going to stake our lives on it, life goes on.
So I have one more thing to add to that, because right now in Europe, we have the European Parliament, I think it is, who are in Brussels and in Strasbourg, and they travel back and forth because the French couldn't bear that the main headquarter would be in Belgium and they wouldn't have something in France. And there's this whole, it's also the reason why we're not bilingual and all speak English in the EU, so we can actually talk to each other. We have all these different languages, but not one shared language that allows us to have a public sphere among Europeans, which is a disaster. We've united coal and steel for 72 years, but not the people in the, within its boundaries. But what I would like to do is to just have that freaking parliament in Brussels and keep them there so that it can focus on their work and not travel back and forth. And then all those wonderful buildings in Strasbourg, that would be a European Bildung University kind of place where we could bring in people from all over Europe to study and share cultural heritage, science, ethical debates, produce cultural television, produce news. One of the things that we don't have in Europe either is that, my Minister of Health and your Minister of Health and somebody else's Minister of Health were not interviewed together during the COVID virus to compare what is going on. So I had all these stories about what goes on in Denmark and Danish news, and a little bit about Germany, a little bit about Spain, and a lot about Italy when it went wrong. but it did not have a conversation among the, health commissionary and the, ministers of health in different countries. So if we could use Strasbourg, and by the way, that is where Gutenberg started his printing press. So, I mean, it has all this history and story to it. It's the place to have this sort of hotspot of European culture, civilization, thinking, future perspectives,
And of course,
development.
this is obviously then my pitch on this. It should have a democracy school too. Because
Yeah, sure.
because I think that is it's a funny thing that our politics, in a way, they've become quite simplistic and black and white through the kind of the populism that has creeped in, across Europe and across the world, indeed. But on the other hand, our politics have become actually really ever more complex, and there's so much paradox and contradiction within that. There's a comparable time. I remember, I don't remember personally, but going back in history, turn of the 19th century, when the first wave of globalization led to massive factory output of ugly furniture, ugly products, because nobody designed the things. There was no art schools. There was no design as a study, as a field of study. Then the Bauhaus came along.
Yep.
And within a very short period of time, this became the blueprint for art education, and it exploded onto the world stage. And now I don't know how many, the output of graduates, fine art graduates in the US is greater than the entire population in France in the 16th century. Annually. So we have had this explosion because we had to give things form and shape. And it's almost as if each time sort of gives birth to the institutions that it needs to survive. And I think this is partially your argument as well. And I think there are a number of institutions that we will need to move forward to, and a sort of a unifying, if you like, theory, and like a building rose model, if you like, that brings those together. I think it's a beautiful idea. Are you kind of in any way kind of pursuing this, or sort of poking people to see?
I will now, among all the other activities at the Global Bildung Network and the European Bildung Network, and our office here in Copenhagen called Nordic Bildung, which is sort of the mothership and the where things are coordinated. I think that would actually be I've written about that Europe University in Strasbourg elsewhere. But the idea of your EU commissioner for Bildung, I hadn't thought about that. So thank you for bringing that idea up. The aesthetics. I mean, that is so you're bringing up two things that we are not investing in right now, and one is aesthetics. And one of the things that is happening right now is that all kinds of fungus, mushrooms, different kinds of living organisms are now being turned into furniture and architecture, and we're beginning to build buildings in wood again. So we need science for this, and there's a lot of science going into that allows us to create aesthetics out of these living organisms in completely new ways. And Strasbourg would be a great place to pursue that. And then the political institutions, because we do not have political institutions to deal with the reality that we're in. I mean, there's if Zuckerberg makes a metaverse, what kind of rights do I have in that? Whatever Zuckerberg gives me. And that is not what I want. I want rights that my democracy has defined through thinking ethically about what it means to be human and what we are supposed to have and do and be able to do in cyberspace. So we need to invest in new political institutions, and we're not doing that. So I think if we could build such a university, school, college, I don't know what to call it, because really it shouldn't just be an academic place for people who are good at sitting on their butt and reading books and having these intellectual fights. It should also be people who are good with working with their hands. I mean, go back to good old Pestalozzi, the head, heart, and hand. We need all of that, and we need to cultivate all of that, and that is Bildung. So
and of course, such an institution, in my way of thinking, would have to, by definition, be a democratic institution, wouldn't it? So
yes.
so one instantly thinks about what kind of democratic institutions do we have, that, you know, or quasi-democratic institutions, international organizations that are democratizing or have democratized to a certain extent, like the European Union, and to what extent could they provide a model for the kinds of structures that we need, you know, at this kind of meta level you're talking about, because it feeds into all of these very other kind of areas, doesn't it? But it is a meta level that increasingly gains in importance. It's almost like the sort of the operating system, and we have totally neglected that. I think it's a really interesting idea, and maybe when we think of sort of 6 to 12, like say like towards the end of the year, maybe that idea in some ways ferments, develops, and might change as well, because you're going to go out and you're going to talk to people, and you know the way things develop, something totally different might come out in that process. But I think there is something that you're pursuing, that kind of in a way points in a very interesting direction. So as a sort of as an intention, how about if we say we meet again in say 6-7 months, and we kind of, with the ambition to sort of see how that idea has taken shape, and how that idea and how your existing resources, that your global and your European Bildung networks, your other networks, your other kind of resources, how they possibly gel, come together to sort of support something, like that may be quite nebulous at this stage still, but something that we can begin to move forward. How does that sound?
Sounds like a great idea. And if I, in the meantime, have become the European Commissioner of Bildung in Strasbourg, we will do it there.
That's right, and surely you're going to kind of commission me to set up a democracy school, no doubt.
And then we'll find somebody to be the director of the Office of Mistakes, or the Department for Mistakes. We'll find somebody.
Absolutely, absolutely. Lene, thank you very, very much. It's been a brilliant conversation. It's not been quite what we thought it would be, but I think it's been.
But it was good.
It was very good, and it actually had a real interesting result that both resonated with you and me, and I think that's always a really positive sign. Thank you very much for making time. We'll stay in touch, and in fact, if there's any really exciting things happening in the background, do keep me in the loop, because I do think you're doing great stuff, and I'd love to kind of just be the fly in the wall and see how things develop.
Well, thank you. Looking forward to it.
Thank you very much. Have a good day.
Thank you. Thank you. Bye.
Bye-bye.